Two people, two destinies, two completely different worlds, seemingly separated forever. But fate had never truly let them go. Ethan Harrington, a powerful and successful businessman who had everything, except the most important thing he had unknowingly lost. Elena Carter, the woman who once loved him with all her heart, only to be abandoned without a word, left to raise their child alone. 5 years apart, 5 years of burying the past. But in just one moment, one fateful encounter, the long-buried secrets were about to be uncovered. The rain poured down mercilessly over the city, soaking everything beneath it. On a dimly lit street, Elena Carter stood motionless, her breath hitching as she gazed at the man before her, Ethan Harrington. He was leaving. Just like that. "I have to go," he said, his deep voice steady, yet devoid of warmth. Elena's lips trembled. "Why?" she whispered, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "You know why," he replied, eyes avoiding hers. She shook her head. "We had a plan, Ethan. We were supposed to have a future together. You promised?" "I can't stay." He took a deep breath, as if forcing himself to remain calm. "I have to focus on my career. Love, it can't hold me back." His words cut her like a knife. She had never been a burden to him before. But now, she was just an obstacle in his path. The rain pounded against the pavement between them, a cruel reminder of the cold reality sinking into her bones. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. There was no goodbye, no embrace, no lingering glance. Ethan turned and walked away. And by the time the sun rose the next morning, Elena would discover a truth that would change everything. She was pregnant. But he was already gone. 5 years later, an unexpected reunion. The Maldives was paradise on Earth. Crystal clear waters stretched to the horizon, luxurious overwater villas floated atop the sea, and the golden sun cast shimmering reflections on the surface. Ethan Harrington stepped off his private helicopter. He was no longer the young man from 7 years ago. Now he was a ruthless businessman, powerful, untouchable, and unwilling to let anyone into his heart. "Mr. Harrington, we have prepared your private villa and conference room as requested," the resort manager greeted him respectfully. "Good. I don't want to be disturbed," Ethan responded coolly. He wasn't here for pleasure. He was here to finalize a billion-dollar deal. But fate had its own plans. At that very moment, a cruise ship docked at Evergreen Paradise Resort. Among the passengers stepping off was Elena Carter, holding the hand of a 7-year-old boy. His blue eyes were identical to Ethan's. Elena had spent the last 7 years raising her son alone. She had endured the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the endless worries of a single mother, all without Ethan. "Mommy, look, the houses are floating on water." The little boy's face lit up as he pointed toward the luxurious villas. Elena smiled, but deep inside, her heart was heavy. This trip wasn't just a vacation. She had come for closure. She never imagined that her past was about to catch up with her. That evening, after a long day of laughter and sandcastles, Elena returned to her villa. She unlocked the door, expecting a quiet night. But the moment she stepped inside, she froze. A man stood in the dimly lit living room. Tall, commanding, familiar, Ethan. Time seemed to stop, his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. Elena. She felt her entire body tense. 5 years, 5 years of avoiding him, of pushing back the memories, and now he was here, in her villa. But what truly stole Ethan's breath away was the little boy emerging from the bedroom, a boy who was his mirror image. Ethan went utterly still. The child looked up, wide-eyed with curiosity. "Mommy, who is that?" Elena's heart pounded violently. She had to stop this. Now, go back to your room, sweetheart, she gently instructed, ushering her son behind her. Ethan stood frozen, his entire world tilting. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. The boy was his son. For 5 years, Ethan had no idea he was a father. For 5 years, he had missed everything. Elena, is he mine? Ethan's voice was raw, unsteady. Elena clenched her fists. Could she deny it? Number. But she also couldn't let him back into their lives. This doesn't concern you anymore, she said coldly. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. You hid this from me for 7 years? His voice was quiet, yet filled with betrayal. Elena didn't answer. She simply turned away, pulling her son into the bedroom and shut the door, leaving Ethan standing in silence, drowning in a truth that would change everything. Ethan hadn't slept. His mind had been consumed by the shocking truth he had just uncovered. He had a son. For 5 years, he had unknowingly abandoned his own child. He had missed everything: his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. But what tormented him the most was not the lost years. It was the betrayal. Why had Elena never told him? Had she truly thought he wouldn't care? Or had she simply moved on? The thought of her in another man's arms made his stomach twist. Had she replaced him? Had she built a family with someone else? Ethan gritted his teeth, his hands curling into fists. No. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The morning sun painted the sky in golden hues as Ethan made his way through the evergreen paradise resort. Then he saw her. At a table near the edge of the outdoor coffee, Elena sat with their son. The boy laughed as he played with his spoon, his small fingers drumming against the table. His blue eyes, the same piercing blue as Ethan's, sparkled with happiness. Ethan's heart clenched. He should have been there for moments like this. He should have been the one making him laugh, reading him bedtime stories, watching him grow. But instead, he had been nothing but a ghost in his own son's life. The anger, the regret, the jealousy. It all coiled inside him, a storm ready to explode. He wouldn't wait anymore. He needed answers. Now. Taking a deep breath, he walked straight toward their table. We need to talk. His voice was low but firm. It wasn't a request. Elena froze. Slowly, she put down her coffee, meeting his gaze with an unreadable expression. Ethan? She exhaled, her voice careful. Now, Elena, he said, taking a seat without invitation. We don't have anything to talk about, she said coolly. That one sentence felt like a slap to his face. Nothing? Nothing to discuss? After 5 years? After a child? Ethan let out a bitter chuckle. So that's it? He murmured, his voice laced with disbelief. You keep my son from me for 7 years, and now you won't even give me an explanation? Elena's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. I did what I had to do, she said evenly. And I don't owe you anything, Ethan. Ethan felt like the ground had just been ripped from beneath him. She really had moved on. She didn't even regret it. You didn't think I had the right to know? He asked, his voice sharper now. And what would you have done, Ethan? Elena countered, her eyes darkening. You left without looking back. You walked away as if I meant nothing to you. You made your choice. Ethan inhaled sharply. He had nothing to say, because deep down, he knew she was right. I would have come back for you, he said, almost to himself. Would you? She challenged, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, another man walked up to their table. A tall, well-dressed man with an easy confidence and a warm smile. He placed a hand gently on Elena's shoulder. Elena, do you want another coffee? He asked, his voice casual. Ethan's entire body went rigid. His blood ran cold. This man was touching her. This man was acting as if he belonged in her life. And the worst part? Elena didn't push him away. She simply glanced at him, nodding slightly before turning back to Ethan. Ethan felt something inside him snap. It all made sense now. She wasn't just keeping his son from him. She had replaced him. She had moved on. "Now I understand," Ethan said, his voice eerily calm. Elena frowned. "This is why you never told me," Ethan continued, a humorless smile twisting his lips. "You already had someone else." The coffee seemed to fall into silence. Elena's expression flickered with something. Shock? Guilt? "Ethan, it's not what you think. It never is it?" He cut her off, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, but he barely noticed. It didn't matter. The truth was right in front of him. "I used to wonder why you never looked for me," he said, his voice cold. "Why you never even tried to tell me the truth. But now I see you had already moved on." Elena opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out, and Ethan took her silence as confirmation. That was all he needed. Without another word, he turned and walked away. If she had moved on, then so would he. But if she thought he would let his son go that easily, she was dead wrong. Elena sat frozen, watching Ethan's retreating figure. She wanted to run after him. She wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that the man standing beside her, Marcus, was not her boyfriend. Marcus was just a friend who had been there for her when she had no one else. A friend who had cared for her, loved her from a distance, but had never once crossed the line. But Ethan didn't know that. And now, he probably never would. Because Ethan was gone. And this time, she wasn't sure if he would ever come back. Evergreen Paradise Resort. Private beach. The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, the sound blending with the distant murmur of music from the resort's evening festivities. Ethan had just left the clinic, DNA results clutched in his hand. His mind was made up. He was going straight to Elena. But before he could take another step, someone blocked his path. Marcus. Dressed sharply in a casual suit, Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression calm. Too calm. "Going somewhere, Harrington?" he asked smoothly. Ethan's jaw clenched. He wasn't in the mood for games. "Move." Marcus didn't budge. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes locked onto Ethan's. "I know what you're doing," he said, "and I'm telling you right now, walk away." Ethan's blood boiled. "You think you can tell me to stay away from my own son?" Ethan growled. Marcus arched a brow. "Your son?" he mused. "Funny, because for the last 7 years, you weren't around. You didn't even know he existed. Meanwhile, I was there." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "You might have been there, but you will never be his father," Ethan shot back. Marcus smirked, but there was no humor in his eyes. "And you think you will? Just because you found out he shares your DNA?" Ethan had had enough. He stepped forward until they were practically nose to nose. "I don't need your permission, Marcus," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I don't give a damn what you think. I'm taking back what's mine." Marcus's smirk finally faded. His expression hardened as he lowered his voice. "Then you'd better be ready for a fight," he warned. The gauntlet had been thrown. It was a battle between two men, one fighting for the past, the other for the future. And the prize? Elena and Noah. Marcus straightened his jacket, exhaling sharply. "You think you can just walk back into their lives and fix everything?" he asked, shaking his head. "You don't know Elena anymore, Ethan. She's not the woman you left behind." Ethan's stomach twisted. but he refused to show weakness. "She doesn't need you," Marcus continued. "She's built a life without you. She's strong, independent. She doesn't need to be someone's second choice." Ethan's anger flared. "She was never my second choice," he snapped. But Marcus didn't back down. "Then why did you leave?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Because he had no answer. Because no excuse could ever erase what he had done. Marcus shook his head, disappointment flashing across his face. "I won't let you hurt them again," he said firmly. "So if you really care about them, Harrington, prove it. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you never get the chance to break their hearts again." Ethan knew a challenge when he saw one. And this was war. Marcus had drawn his line in the sand, and Ethan was more than ready to cross it. He wasn't giving up, not this time. Elena's villa. That night Ethan didn't waste another second. With the DNA results in hand, with Marcus's warning ringing in his ears, he marched straight to Elena's door. He had wasted enough time. Now it was time to fight for what was his. He knocked firmly, his heart pounding against his ribs. Seconds later, the door opened. And there she was, Elena, her eyes widened in surprise. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He didn't hesitate. He didn't let her push him away this time. He stepped forward, holding out the DNA results. "I know the truth now, Elena," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Noah is my son." Silence. The air between them crackled with tension. Elena's lips parted, but no words came out. She had been caught. She had spent years hiding this from him. And now, she had no choice but to face him. Ethan wasn't going anywhere, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he came for. His son, his answers, and maybe the love he had lost. Elena's villa. Living room. The air inside the villa was thick with tension. Elena stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared outside. She didn't turn when Ethan closed the door behind him. She had known this moment would come. She had spent years preparing for it. And yet, she still wasn't ready. "Say something," Ethan demanded, his voice rough. "You've been lying to me for 7 years, Elena. At least have the decency to tell me why." She closed her eyes for a moment before turning to face him. "I didn't lie to you," she whispered. "I protected my son." Ethan flinched. "Our son?" he corrected, his voice laced with frustration. "You had no right to make that decision alone." Elena's eyes flashed. "And you had no right to leave me with no explanation," she shot back, her voice shaking. Silence. Ethan had expected her to argue, to deny, to fight him, but her words hit like a knife straight to the chest. "I was alone, Ethan," she continued, her voice cracking. "I was pregnant and terrified, and you were gone. What was I supposed to do? Wait around for a man who abandoned me?" Guilt clawed at him. Because no matter how much he hated to admit it, she was right. "I didn't know," Ethan murmured, his tone softer now. "Exactly," Elena exhaled. "You didn't know. You didn't care." That was the part that hurt the most. That was the part she had never been able to forgive. But Ethan wasn't going to let her believe that anymore. He had made mistakes, but this wasn't just about him and Elena anymore. It was about Noah. And he wasn't leaving without a fight. Noah's bedroom. Later that night. Ethan had expected resistance. He had expected Elena to shut him out. But she didn't. She let him stay. She let him meet Noah, properly. And that was the only chance Ethan needed. He stood in the doorway of Noah's room, watching as the little boy slept, his tiny fingers curled around his stuffed animal. "You've been gone for 7 years," Elena murmured behind him. "You can't expect him to accept you overnight." Ethan turned to her, his eyes dark with determination. "I don't expect anything, Elena," he said, "but I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." Elena studied him for a long moment, looking for a reason not to believe him, looking for a reason to push him away. But for the first time in 7 years, she found none. Because this time, Ethan wasn't just saying words. This time, he was proving it. Evergreen Paradise Resort. Bar. Ethan sat at the bar, nursing a drink as he processed everything. Noah was his. Elena had let him stay, but it still wasn't enough. He had to make her believe in him again. He had to make Noah see him as more than just a stranger. And then, Marcus appeared. "You don't give up easily, do you?" Marcus said, sliding into the seat next to him. "Ethan, didn't even look at him." "Not when it comes to my family," he replied coolly. Marcus let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Family? You think you can walk in and be a father just like that?" Ethan finally turned to face him, his patience wearing thin. "You don't get to decide that." Marcus exhaled, leaning forward. "Maybe not. But you should know something, Harrington." Ethan frowned. "What?" Marcus's expression turned serious. "Elena isn't the same woman you left behind. And if you hurt her again, if you make her regret letting you back into her life, I swear I'll be the one to make you pay for it." Ethan didn't flinch, because he had already made his decision. He wasn't leaving, and nothing Marcus said would change that. Evergreen Paradise Resort. Breakfast hall. Ethan sat across the table from Noah, watching as the boy stabbed at his pancakes with his tiny fork. The silence was deafening. Ethan had expected questions. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't expected to feel this helpless. Noah barely acknowledged him, his attention focused on his food. "He doesn't trust me. And why should he? I'm a stranger to him." Ethan swallowed the frustration rising in his chest. He had imagined this moment countless times, but reality was much harder than fantasy. He couldn't just walk in and expect Noah to love him overnight. He had to earn it. So, he tried again. "So, Noah," Ethan started carefully, "what's your favorite thing to do?" Noah shrugged, not looking up. "I don't know." Ethan exhaled. This was going to take time. Elena, sitting beside Noah, glanced between them. She could feel Ethan's frustration, but she also saw the nervousness in his eyes, the vulnerability he rarely showed. "Noah loves the ocean," she said softly, giving Ethan something to work with. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "The ocean, huh?" he said, his tone lighter. "You know, when I was your age, I used to love building sandcastles, but mine always collapsed. I bet yours are better." Noah finally looked up. "Mine don't collapse," he said matter-of-factly. "Mom taught me how to make them strong." Ethan's heart clenched. "I'd like to see one sometime," he said gently. "Maybe you could teach me." Noah didn't answer right away, but then, after a long pause, he gave a tiny nod. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and for Ethan that was enough. Later that afternoon, beachside Noah played in the sand a few feet away from where Ethan and Elena stood watching him. The boys' laughter mixed with the sound of the waves, but Ethan couldn't relax. He still felt the distance. He was still just an outsider. But then, Noah did something unexpected. The little boy turned around, dusting the sand off his hands, and walked straight up to Ethan. "Mommy said you were gone for a long time," Noah said, his eyes searching. Ethan's breath hitched. "Yeah, buddy, I was," he admitted, kneeling so he was at eye level with his son. Noah studied him carefully, as if trying to figure something out. "Did you not like me?" Ethan's chest tightened painfully. "Noah," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know about you. If I had..." I would have never left. Noah frowned, as if trying to process that. Are you going to leave again? Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached out, placing a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder. Never, he said firmly. I will never leave you again. Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. For the first time, trust flickered in his young eyes. Ethan had won his first battle. Evergreen Paradise Resort. Private Lounge. Ethan had just finished putting Noah to bed when he stepped into the resort's lounge for a drink. And of course, Marcus was waiting. The moment their eyes met, the tension was instant. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching Ethan approach. You're making progress, Marcus observed. Ethan didn't rise to the bait. What do you want, Marcus? Marcus exhaled, swirling his drink. I came to give you one last warning. You may have won a battle, but you haven't won the war. Ethan clenched his jaw. This isn't a war, he said coldly. This is my family. Marcus scoffed. Elena doesn't trust easily, and you know that. If you break her heart again, I'll be there to pick up the pieces. And next time, you won't get another chance. Ethan met his gaze without flinching. I won't need another chance, he said, his voice deadly serious. Because I'm not leaving this time. Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then finally, he nodded. We'll see, Harrington. And with that, Marcus walked away. The challenge was still there, but Ethan had bigger things to worry about. Because now, there was only one person left to convince. Elena. Evergreen Paradise Resort. Villa balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, waves gently lapping against the shore. The night was calm, the stars bright, but Elena's mind was anything but peaceful, because Ethan was standing behind her. Noah fell asleep in 2 minutes. He said she didn't turn to face him. He had a long day. Silence stretched between them. Ethan knew she was avoiding him, and this time, he wasn't letting her run. He stepped closer, his voice lower now. Tell me the truth, Elena. Are you afraid of letting me back in? She closed her eyes, gripping the railing. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. She exhaled sharply. Ethan. She hesitated. I can't do this again. I can't survive another heartbreak. Ethan clenched his jaw. You think I'm going to leave? That's what you do, Ethan. You leave? Ethan flinched. I didn't know about Noah. But you knew about me. You knew you were leaving me behind, and you still walked away. Ethan was silent, because she was right, and there was no excuse that would ever change that. The truth was simple. He had broken her heart. And now she was terrified he would do it again. You're right. I left you. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I can't take that back. Elena swallowed hard, caught off guard by his honesty. But I need you to know something. There wasn't a single day in those 7 years that I didn't think about you. Her breath caught. I thought moving on would be easy. Ethan, I told myself I made the right choice. That I had to focus on my career. That love would only get in the way. His eyes darkened with regret. But I was wrong. Because every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was you. Elena's heart clenched. You think I don't regret it? That I don't wake up every morning hating myself for what I did to you? She looked away, tears burning behind her eyes. I never stopped loving you, Elena, Ethan whispered. And I never will. She felt the walls around her heart start to crumble. But was love enough? Could she really let him back in, knowing the risk? Knowing that if he left again, it would destroy her completely? Evergreen Paradise Resort. The next morning, Elena woke. Her mind was a battlefield, a war between the past and the present. She had to make a decision. Could she trust Ethan again? Or would it be safer to keep her heart locked away forever? He deserved a father. He deserved love. But what if Ethan left again? What if history repeated itself? Elena couldn't bear to think about it. A message from Marcus. And the moment she read it, her stomach dropped. "Elena, I need to talk to you. It's about Ethan, and I think you need to hear it before you make any decisions." What did Marcus know? What was he about to reveal? And would it change everything? Evergreen Paradise Resort, Marcus's private suite. The air was thick with tension as Elena stepped inside, arms crossed tightly against her chest. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to hear anything Marcus had to say. But she also couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut. Marcus wasn't the type to send cryptic messages without a reason. "All right," she said, her voice sharp. "What is it? What do you know?" Marcus studied her carefully, as if trying to decide how much to say. Then he sighed and walked over to the small bar, pouring himself a drink. "Ethan Harrington," Marcus started, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You really think you know the man he is now?" Elena's patience was wearing thin. "Marcus, just say it." He hesitated. Then he slid a folder across the table. "This is what I wanted you to see." Elena's stomach twisted as she stared at the folder. A part of her didn't want to open it. Because once she did, there was no going back. Slowly she reached for it, her fingers trembling as she flipped it open. And what she saw made her blood run cold. A past she never knew: documents, emails, reports, bank transactions, memos, signatures. And Ethan's name was on all of them. Her eyes darted across the pages, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. It was all there. Every piece of evidence pointed to one thing. Ethan had made a deal with the very company that had nearly destroyed her life. 5 years ago, right before he left her. Elena felt like she couldn't breathe. "He knew," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "He knew exactly what was going to happen to your father's company, Elena, and he still walked away." Elena's hands clenched the papers, her vision blurring with anger and betrayal. This couldn't be real. Ethan wouldn't have done this to her. Would he? But the proof was right in front of her. And suddenly, every doubt she had about trusting him came rushing back. Evergreen Paradise Resort. Ethan's villa. Elena didn't wait. She stormed straight to Ethan's villa, her heart pounding with fury. He had just stepped out onto the balcony when she arrived, his face lighting up when saw her. But the moment he caught the look in her eyes, his smile disappeared. "Elena, what's wrong?" She didn't speak. She just threw the folder at him. Ethan caught it, confusion flashing across his face. Then he looked down, and his entire body tensed. He knew what this was, and he knew exactly what it meant. "You knew," Elena whispered, her voice shaking. "You knew what was happening to my father's company. You knew they were planning to take everything from him." Ethan's grip tightened around the folder. "Elena, it's not that simple." "Don't!" she snapped, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare lie to me again!" Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't have a choice," he said finally. "It was complicated." "Complicated?" Elena let out a bitter laugh. "My family lost everything, Ethan, and you just walked away like it meant nothing." Ethan took a step forward, but she stepped back. And that hurt more than any words could. "Elena, please," his voice was raw. "I swear to you, I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you." Tears burned in her eyes. "Protecting me," she whispered. "Number, you were protecting yourself." Silence. Because deep down, She was right. And for the first time, Ethan realized he might have already lost her. Evergreen Paradise Resort. Ethan's villa. The silence between them was unbearable. Ethan stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his face ashen as he tried to find the right words. But what could he possibly say? How do you defend the indefensible? Elena, he finally whispered, you have to believe me. I thought I was doing the right thing. She let out a bitter laugh. The right thing? She echoed, shaking her head. You knew what was happening. You knew my family was being ruined, and you just let it happen. Ethan's jaw tightened. I wasn't in a position to stop it. No, but you were in a position to tell me, she snapped. You could have warned me. You could have. Her voice broke, and she turned away, pressing a hand to her chest as if trying to hold herself together. Ethan took a step forward, desperate. But she took a step back. And that was when he knew. He had lost her. I can't do this, Elena whispered, shaking her head. I can't go through this again. Ethan felt something inside him crack. Elena, please, he said, his voice rough. Don't shut me out. Not now. She lifted her head, her eyes filled with heartbreak. You shut me out first, Ethan, she said quietly. 7 years ago. And now, I don't know if I can ever let you back in. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the wreckage of everything he had fought so hard to rebuild. Elena's villa. Late night, Elena sat on the edge of Noah's bed, gently running a hand through his hair. He had fallen asleep easily, unaware of the storm raging in her heart. But tomorrow she would have to tell him something. He had started to trust Ethan. He had started to see him as more than a stranger. But now, could she really let that continue? Could she risk her son getting attached to a man who had already broken them once? She exhaled shakily, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. Maybe it was better if Ethan just left for good. Maybe it was better if she let go of the foolish hope she had held on to. But then, why did it hurt so much? Evergreen Paradise Resort. Marcus's suite. You did the right thing, Marcus said, pouring himself a drink. Elena looked at him, her arms crossed tightly. Then why do I feel like I just made the biggest mistake of my life? Marcus studied her for a long moment. Because you still love him, he said simply. She didn't respond. Because she didn't know how. Did she still love Ethan? Or was she just in love with the memory of the man he used to be? Marcus sighed and set down his glass. Look, I get it. He's Noah's father. And a part of you wants to believe he's changed. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. But people don't change that easily, Elena. You need to protect yourself, and you need to protect Noah. Elena swallowed hard. She had spent 7 years protecting Noah. But who was going to protect her? Because if she let Ethan back in, and he left again, it would destroy her. And she wasn't sure if she could survive that. Evergreen Paradise Resort, Ethan's villa. Ethan sat alone on the edge of the bed, gripping the DNA results in his hands. The paper was slightly crumpled now, the words almost burned into his mind. Noah was his son, his flesh and blood. And yet, after all these years, he still felt like a stranger in his own child's life. He had to fix this. He had to fix everything. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A message from his assistant. Sir, your jet is ready. If you're leaving, we need confirmation. Leaving. That was the easy option. But Ethan had run away before, and he had spent every day since regretting it. Not this time. He grabbed his keys and strode toward the door. He knew exactly where he needed to be. Elena's villa. Afternoon, Elena was sitting on the patio, watching Noah play in the sand, when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Her heart clenched when she saw who it was. Ethan, looking exhausted, determined, and completely unshaken. She should tell him to leave. She should tell him it was over. But before she could open her mouth, Noah turned around. "Dad." Ethan froze. Elena's breath hitched. Noah had never called him that before. Not once. And the moment the word left Noah's lips, Ethan felt his entire world shift. He swallowed hard, crouching down. "Hey, buddy." Noah hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "Are you leaving?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not if you don't want me to." Noah stared at him. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "I don't want you to go." Ethan let out a shaky breath. For the first time, Noah was choosing him. And that meant everything. But what about Elena? Could she ever forgive him? Elena had spent 7 years convincing herself she didn't need Ethan, that she was better off without him. But now, watching the way he looked at Noah, the way Noah looked at him, she felt something inside her break. "Elena," Ethan said softly, standing up. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I need you to know, I'm not leaving. Not this time." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But was love really enough? Could she risk it all again? She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. And then, finally, she made her choice. The sun had begun to set, casting golden streaks across the ocean. But inside Elena's chest, a storm still raged. Ethan had promised he wouldn't leave again, but she had heard promises before. And promises had never been enough. "I don't know how to trust you again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Then let me prove it to you," he said, stepping closer. "Let me show you that I mean it this time." Elena swallowed hard. "And what if I can't?" Ethan looked her straight in the eyes, unwavering. "Then I'll wait, however long it takes." Elena had never seen him like this before. So raw, so vulnerable, so completely determined. And for the first time, she wondered. Maybe he really had changed. Noah had been silent for a long time, watching them from the steps of the villa. He had never seen his mom like this, and he had never seen his dad fight so hard for something. Finally, he spoke. "Mom?" Elena turned, her breath catching. Noah rarely asked serious questions, but when he did, they always mattered. "If you don't let Dad stay, does that mean I don't get to have a dad?" The words hit Elena like a tidal wave. She had spent years protecting Noah from disappointment. But had she been protecting him, or protecting herself? Noah deserved a father, and maybe she deserved a second chance too. Ethan didn't pressure her. He just waited, and that's what made her decision even harder. She looked at Noah, his small, hopeful face, his bright, questioning eyes. He wanted this. He deserved this, and so did she. Taking a deep breath, Elena finally looked back at Ethan, and for the first time, she let go of the past. "You have one chance, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "One chance to prove to me that I can trust you again." Ethan's breath hitched. He had expected a fight, a rejection, but instead, she was giving him hope. "I won't waste it," he vowed, his voice rough with emotion. Elena didn't smile. She wasn't ready for that yet, but she was ready to try, and that was enough. Elena had expected Ethan to leave the next day. She had given him an opening, an excuse to walk away, but when she stepped outside, she found him exactly where he said he'd be, with Noah. Not at a business meeting, not preparing to leave, but sitting cross-legged in the sand, helping their son build the biggest sandcastle she had ever seen. "This is the defense wall," Noah was explaining seriously, patting down the structure. In case the waves try to get us. Ethan nodded, playing along. Smart thinking. We need to reinforce it. Can't let anything take this down. Elena stood frozen, watching them. For years, she had done everything alone. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every nightmare. And now, for the first time, she wasn't alone anymore. And that terrified her. That evening, beach bonfire later that night, the resort held a bonfire for the guests, and Noah begged them to go. Elena had planned to say no, but then Ethan reached for her hand. Come with us, he said, his voice gentle, and to her surprise, she said yes. They sat together, watching Noah laugh as he toasted marshmallows. For the first time in years, things felt normal. Ethan caught her staring and gave her a small smile. Feels like a dream, doesn't it? Elena swallowed. More like something I never thought I'd have again. Ethan turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. Then let me make it real, Elena. Let me prove to you that this is where I belong. She didn't answer. But for the first time, she didn't push him away. And that was enough. 3 weeks later, California. Elena never thought Ethan would follow her back home. But he did. He left everything behind, his meetings, his billion-dollar deals, his old life. And instead, he showed up at her front door, ready to be the father Noah needed. Not just for a vacation, not just for a moment, but for good. Ethan had always been a man of ambition, a man who built empires. But now he was building something else, a family. He took Noah to school, helped with his homework, showed up for soccer games. And slowly, piece by piece, he became someone Elena could trust again. And one evening, as they sat on the porch, watching Noah chase fireflies in the yard, Ethan finally spoke the words he had been holding back. I love you, Elena. I never stopped. Elena's breath caught. She had waited 7 years to hear those words again. But this time, she wasn't afraid. Because this time, she believed him. I love you too, she whispered, finally letting go of the past. And as Ethan pulled her into his arms, she knew. This time, he wasn't leaving. This time, they were truly home.